Hello and welcome. I'm Amy.
And I'm Tom. So, picture this. You're in Greece. It's a nation, well, right on the brink, a crisis unfolding before your eyes.
Yeah.
We begin with the premier paying out the very first euro from the National Bank in Athens. It's meant to be this symbol of stability, you know?
Right, you'd think so.
Yet just a few years later, the whole story unravels.
Yeah.
We find out about massive financial fraud, unemployment shoots up over 36%, and tragically, the suicide rate triples in just 2 years.
It's truly shocking for a European nation. And this wasn't just like numbers in a report.
No.
The Greek people were pushed to the absolute limit. They took to the streets. They were demanding change.
But they were met with force, weren't they?
Oh, absolutely. The government response was harsh. Police using rubber bullets, tear gas. There are these harrowing images from that time.
I remember seeing some of them.
Yeah, like that photojournalist. Hospitalized, fractured skull from a police baton, over 500 people injured.
Just awful.
And what's even more extraordinary, military special forces reservists, they actually joined the protests.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, demanding the government resign. But they were eventually forbidden, told to stop, under the pretext of preventing a military coup.
Wow. That paints an incredibly volatile picture. So the core question, the mystery we're really digging into today is how? How did Greece, a nation inside Europe, get into such a catastrophic financial mess?
Right.
We're going to unpack the shocking financial deception, the political decisions, some brutal ones, and the very real human cost.
Yeah, the human element is crucial here.
Definitely. And to understand it all, we're peeling back the layers, looking at some surprising facts, surprising connections. Our guide for this is a really detailed YouTube documentary. It's called Jak Unia Europejska Pogruja Greszna from the Independent Trader channel.
It lays out a pretty compelling case.
So let's get into it. To really understand the roots of this crisis, we actually have to go back quite a way, over 40 years.
Yeah, this wasn't an overnight thing.
No, it's about these deeply ingrained patterns. Reckless spending. It kind of starts with Andreas Papandreou's election as prime minister. He was the leader of the Socialist PASOK party.
Right. And his big thing was he basically promised everything to everyone.
Okay, so what did that actually mean in practice? For the budget, for policies?
Well, it meant a huge, rapid increase in social spending. It jumped from like 10% of GDP up to 16% in just a few years.
Wow.
So he delivered on the promises, sure, but the key thing is Greece didn't have the money.
Uh-oh.
We saw things like quasi-mandatory wage increases, way more civil servants hired, the state taking over banks, insurance companies, key industries like cement, fertilizer, pharmaceuticals, textiles.
A massive expansion of the state then.
Huge and hugely expensive.
So with all this spending, what happened to Greece's debt? Did it start to reflect this immediately?
Oh, absolutely. You could see the financial strain right away. Greece just couldn't afford it. Public debt was around 27% GDP when Papandreou took office after his 8 years. It shot up to over 60%.
60%. That's a massive leap in just 8 years.
It really is. They were already in deep, deep trouble, way before the Eurozone was even a factor.
So did the governments that came after him manage to, pull back? Or did that spending just keep going?
Well, that's the really shocking part, isn't it? You'd think a new government, maybe a different party, would slam on the brakes.
Right. Common sense, maybe?
Apparently not. Even when the socialists lost power, the new center-right government came in, and maybe they were scared of the public reaction, I don't know. But they didn't cut spending.
You're kidding.
Nope. They actually continued the spending, and the debt went from 60% to an incredible 100% of GDP in just 4 more years.
100%.
And then, believe it or not, the nation re-elected the socialists, who just kept spending money they didn't have.
So it wasn't just one party. It was like a systemic issue.
Exactly. It seems like it revealed this deep-seated problem in Greece, politically, culturally maybe. No party, left or right, seemed willing or able to actually rein in spending, maybe because the public expected the state to provide so much.
Okay, so that's the backdrop. A nation already, financially precarious. But then came this decision that really threw fuel on the fire. Andreas Papandreou choosing to join the Eurozone.
Yes, a truly pivotal and, as the source suggests, destructive decision.
What was the immediate effect? Just the announcement itself?
Well, the mere announcement opened the floodgates. Suddenly, Greece had access to incredibly cheap capital. Borrowing costs just plummeted.
How much are we talking?
They went from like a staggering 20% annually down to 7% and then eventually down to just 4%. It must have seemed like free money.
Wow. Okay, but why? Why did the market suddenly think Greece was such a good bet?
It was all about perception. Financial markets basically thought, okay, Greece is joining the Eurozone. It's going to be stable. It's going to be safe now.
Ah, the Eurozone halo effect.
Exactly. The risk of their old currency, the drachma, devaluing was gone. So Greek bonds were suddenly seen as almost as safe as German or French bonds.
Which, in hindsight,
Was a massive misperception, a huge collective leap of faith by the market that turned out to be, well, completely wrong.
and instead of using all this new cheap money for, say, investing in reforms, fixing infrastructure, maybe fostering innovation, what did the government do with it?
Yeah, that's the tragedy, really. They directed it towards what the source calls absurd public spending.
Absurd how? Give us some examples.
Oh, the examples are pretty wild. According to the source, you had foresters getting bonuses just for working outdoors.
Seriously.
Yep. Civil servants getting 290 euros for, wait for it, hand-delivering envelopes.
Right.
420 for washing their hands at work. 600 euros simply for being punctual.
Okay, this is sounding less like governing and more like
Yeah.
something else.
It gets better. 120 euros for using the free canteen. Judges got 595 for handling cases effectively, which you'd think was their job anyway. Drivers got 65 for warming up car engines.
It paints a picture of a system just hemorrhaging money on, well, on nonsense.
Precisely. And a system like that, it's just ripe for exploitation, right?
I imagine people found ways, did they?
Oh, definitely. The source gives some really vivid examples, like on the island of Zakynthos. Out of 42,000 residents, somehow 700 people were registered as blind and claiming disability benefits.
700. That seems statistically unlikely.
Highly unlikely. Or you had farmers who were deceased but still receiving olive oil subsidies for years after they'd passed away.
Wow.
Public sector workers could retire super early, like 53. And there was this bizarre tax loophole where unfinished properties weren't taxed. So guess what happened?
People just didn't finish their buildings.
Exactly. Deliberately leaving them unfinished to avoid taxes. It wasn't just isolated fraud. It pointed to a wider culture of, gaming the system.
And if one single event kind of symbolized all this financial recklessness, it has to be the 2004 Olympic Games in Athens.
Absolutely. The Olympics.
What was the price tag on that and what happened afterwards?
The official cost was over $15 billion. New airport, new metro, stadiums, tram network, the works. Looked great at the time.
Did it?
But the real cost came later, maintaining all this brand new infrastructure. Greece was already drowning in debt. They just couldn't afford the upkeep.
So what happened to the facility?
It's actually quite sad. Over 30% of them just fell into ruin, became derelict. All that money spent for decaying buildings. A spectacular show, yes, but ultimately a financial disaster for Greece.
So the situation was bad, getting worse.
Yeah.
But the real explosion, the moment the world finally woke up, was 2009.
Yes.
That's when the new prime minister, George Papandreou, son of Andreas, actually made this absolutely stunning announcement.
Yeah, he dropped a bombshell.
What did he reveal?
He basically stood up and said, look, the budget deficit isn't 6% like we've been telling everyone.
Say.
It's actually 12.7% of GDP. And it turned out later it was even higher, over 15%.
15%. That's more than 5 times the official Eurozone limit.
Exactly. 5 times. And the immediate question on everyone's lips was, how on earth did they hide this? How did they fool the world for so long?
And the answer involves a very big, very well-known global bank, doesn't it?
It does. Goldman Sachs.
How did Greece pull off this deception? What was Goldman's role?
It was, well, quite clever financially, if ethically dubious. Greece would borrow money in foreign currencies like dollars and yen.
Okay.
Then they used these complex financial instruments called currency swaps, arranged by Goldman Sachs, to convert them into euros. But here's the trick. The exchange rate used in these swaps wasn't the real market rate.
It was manipulated.
Exactly. It was manipulated specifically to understate the official public debt. It basically spread the difference, the hidden debt, over many years, making the annual deficit look much smaller than it really was.
And because these weren't technically called loans.
Precisely. They weren't reported to Eurostat, the EU's statistics agency. They flew completely under the radar. Goldman Sachs provided the financial engineering to make it happen.
So a huge global bank helps a country basically cook the books, hide its debt. And I'm guessing Goldman Sachs didn't do this out of the goodness of their hearts.
Not exactly a favor, no. The New York Times reported they earned up to $300 million in commissions from just one of these swap deals.
$300 million.
Yep. Officially paid as consulting services, of course. It was incredibly profitable for Goldman.
And as things got tighter and tighter for Greece, they started making even more desperate moves, right? Like a gambler pawning their possessions.
That's a good analogy. They were running out of ways to borrow, so they started essentially pawning their future income.
How did that work?
They began handing over the rights to future revenue streams from national assets. Things called parataxes, basically, the future profits from highways, airports, even the state lottery, the Joker game.
So they were mortgaging the country's future earnings just to pay today's bills.
Exactly that, a truly desperate measure.
So Greece was already balancing on this knife edge, fiddling the books, pawning assets, and then the whole world economy took a nosedive.
Yep, 2008, Lehman Brothers collapses.
Global financial crisis, panic in the markets, deep recession. What did that mean for Greece's access to the cheap money they had gotten used to?
It just vanished
Yeah.
overnight. The tap was turned off completely, no more cheap loans.
And this really highlights a key difference, doesn't it, between countries in the Eurozone and those with their own currency.
Absolutely critical difference.
Can you elaborate on that? Like, how did a country with its own currency handle this period differently?
Well, look at Poland during the same crisis. Poland weathered the storm much better. Why? Two main reasons.
Okay.
One, it had its own currency, the zloty, and its own independent central bank. The National Bank of Poland could adjust interest rates, manage the currency value to help the economy. Greece, locked in at the euro, couldn't do that.
Right. No independent monetary policy.
Exactly. And two, Poland went into the crisis with relatively moderate public debt, about 46% of GDP. Greece at that point, over 110%.
Big difference.
Huge. That flexibility and lower debt burden made Poland much more resilient. Greece had neither.
And just as Greece is hitting this financial brick wall, its government, the center-right one at the time, was drowning in scandals.
Yeah, political chaos on top of the economic crisis.
What kind of corruption accusations were flying around?
It was pretty widespread. The shipping minister accused of taking bribes. The agriculture minister got slammed for selling state land to a monastery at a ridiculously low price. The labor minister faced charges over illegal immigrant employment. Public trust just evaporated. The government lost all credibility.
And the result?
Snap elections. The whole situation was untenable. The corruption just compounded the sense that nobody was steering the ship competently through the storm.
So the Greek people, fed up, they turned back to the socialist PASOK party. They elected George Papandreou, Andres' son, as prime minister.
Yes, inheriting an absolute nightmare scenario.
And what's one of the first things he does after taking office?
He knows the country is basically bankrupt. So just 2 weeks in, he goes public. He announces the Greek treasury is empty. Kaput.
Wow. Just lays it bare.
And he admits it. Admits that successive governments, including his own father's, had been falsifying data for years, deceiving not just the Greek people, but all of Europe.
A stunning admission. Decades of deception revealed.
Absolutely. Imagine the shockwaves.
So how did the powers in Europe, Brussels, Berlin, Paris, react to this bombshell? Was it, oh, dear, how can we help poor Greece?
Not quite. The reaction was primarily fear. But not fear for Greece, really.
Fear for themselves.
Exactly. Fear for their own future. See, German and French banks were holding the lion's share of Greek government bonds. If Greece defaulted,
Domino effect.
potentially catastrophic domino effect, it could have brought down major European banks, maybe even threatened the entire Eurozone project.
Right.
So this was about protecting the European banking system, first and foremost. Self-preservation.
Okay, so to stop that happening, enter the Troika.
Ah, yes, the infamous Troika.
That's the European Commission, the European Central Bank, ECB, and the International Monetary Fund, IMF. They came up with a bailout plan, right?
They did. A massive one, $110 billion over 3 years.
Sounds like a lifeline. But there were strings attached. Big strings.
Oh, enormous strings. This wasn't charity. The price for the money was essentially Greece giving up its economic sovereignty.
Giving up sovereignty. How?
He had to accept the Troika's demands, and those demands were incredibly harsh. We're talking huge tax increases, deep cuts to pensions, slashing public sector jobs, and a forced mass sell-off of national assets.
Wow. So austerity on steroids, basically.
Pretty much an unprecedented level of external control imposed on a supposedly sovereign nation.
And what kind of national assets are we talking about being sold off? Any specific examples?
Yeah, the list is pretty sobering. 14 regional airports were sold off to a German company.
German company?
And the irony, the purchase was partly financed by a German state loan to Greece.
You couldn't make it up.
Right. China took over the Piraeus port, a really strategic port for Europe. They also got the National Energy Transmission Company, raising big national security questions. Even the state railways were sold off to an Italian company for just 45 million. Peanuts, really. It felt like a fire sale of the country's silver.
So a really harsh medicine prescribed by the Troika. Did it work? Did these austerity measures actually stabilize the Greek economy?
Well, this is where it gets really counterintuitive and frankly disastrous. The Troika's goal was to cut the deficit, right?
Yeah.
But by slashing public sector wages and pensions so brutally, they simultaneously destroyed domestic demand. People had no money to spend. The economy tanked even harder.
So austerity made the recession worse.
Exactly. And because the economy shrank, the debt as a percentage of GDP actually went up, not down. It soared from 147% to over 180%.
So the cure was worse than the disease, in a way.
It certainly seemed that way. It was a classic example of how austerity imposed too harshly and quickly can backfire spectacularly.
What's really staggering here, though, is you have this 110 billion loan package, but Greece's debt situation actually got worse. Where did all that money go? Who did the bailout really help?
This is one of the most stunning facts from the source material. Only about 5% of that 110 billion actually went into reviving the Greek economy itself.
Only 5%. Where did the other 95% go?
Over 100 billion of it went straight back out the door to repay Greece's creditors.
The banks.
Primarily, yes. The vast majority were European banks, especially French and German ones. So the bailout was less about saving Greece and more about saving the European banks that had lent Greece money.
So it bailed out the lenders, not the borrower.
That's essentially what happened, yes. Protecting the financial system took precedence over the Greek economy or the Greek people.
Okay, so facing this disaster, deepening recession, crushing debt, Greece tries to take matters into its own hands again. They announced they wanted to issue new bonds, right? $3 billion worth.
Yes, trying to tap the markets again.
And incredibly, who do they turn to for help in selling these bonds?
Goldman Sachs, again. The very same bank that helped them hide the debt in the first place.
Why on earth go back to them?
Well, presumably they thought Goldman Sachs still had the market clout, the influence, to find investors and persuade them to buy Greek debt, even in this climate.
And did it work initially?
Surprisingly, yes, at first. Goldman Sachs managed to sell $8 billion worth of bonds, way more than the initial target. Demand was huge, apparently reaching $24 billion, lured by a pretty attractive 6% interest rate.
So, a moment of hope for Greece. Maybe things were turning around.
It looked that way for about 2 days.
Only 2 days. What happened?
The Financial Times published a story, a false story, it turned out. It claimed that China had pulled out of a planned, much larger purchase of Greek bonds, $25 billion.
Okay, damaging rumor. Where did it come from?
The leak, according to the source, was traced back to Goldman Sachs itself.
Goldman Sachs leaked a false story damaging the bond sale they were managing. That
Yeah.
makes no sense unless...
Unless you look at what else Goldman was doing. This is where the profound conflict of interest comes in.
Go on.
While Goldman was officially helping Greece sell its bonds, it was simultaneously advising its other clients to buy Greek CDS's credit default swaps.
CDSs. Those are basically insurance policies against Greece defaulting.
Right.
Bets that Greece will fail.
Exactly. So the bank hired to restore confidence in Greece was actively recommending bets against Greece to its other clients. They were literally betting on Greece's bankruptcy for their own profit.
While supposedly helping them avoid bankruptcy.
Precisely. They were deepening the very panic they were paid to alleviate. It's hard to find words for that level of double dealing.
Absolutely staggering.
Yeah.
And while all this high finance maneuvering and alleged backstabbing is going on, we absolutely cannot forget the impact on ordinary people.
No, the human cost was immense.
Life became unbearable for many, didn't it? What did austerity actually mean day to day? For health? For jobs?
It was devastating. The public health budget was slashed by 40%.
40%. What does that mean in reality?
It meant shortages of basic medicines, hospitals closing down, patients literally being abandoned because the system couldn't cope.
Just unimaginable.
Average wages collapsed. They went from around €1,300 a month down to just $700.
Really halved.
Yeah. And youth unemployment. It soared to over 50%. Half the young people in the country with no job, no prospects. Think about the despair that creates.
It's hard to even comprehend. And that despair, that anger, it boiled over onto the streets, didn't it? Mass protests.
Huge process. At one point, 200,000 people gathered in Athens on a single day.
And the response? still violent.
Yes, police met them with tear gas, batons. The clashes were frequent and intense, and tragically, during one protest, someone threw a Molotov cocktail into a bank. It started a fire,
Oh.
and 3 people inside were killed, including a pregnant woman. The social fabric was just being ripped apart.
In that climate of just utter disillusionment, anger, desperation, people started looking for radical answers, didn't they? A different kind of leader.
Yes, they did, and that's when the far-right Golden Dawn Party saw its chance.
Led by Nikolaos Michalogliakos. What was his background? He wasn't exactly a typical politician.
No, not at all. Michalogliakos had a pretty checkered past. Arrested as a teenager for being in a paramilitary group, arrested again for disrupting a police funeral, served in the special forces, then arrested again for illegal weapons and explosives.
Quite the CV.
Yeah. He then founded the Golden Dawn newspaper and eventually the political party. His background definitely gave an edge to their extreme message.
And what was that message? What did Golden Dawn promise?
It was simple, nationalistic, and angry. Things like unconditional love for the homeland, paired with intense hatred for communists and the system. They hammered the Troika, calling it an economic occupation.
Okay.
And crucially, a central promise was to stop immigration and deport over 90% of existing immigrants. Very hardline stuff.
And did this message work? Did people respond?
Shockingly well, yes. That simple, potent mix resonated with a lot of frustrated Greeks. In the first election after the crisis really hit, Golden Dawn got almost 7% of the vote.
7%. Was that significant for them?
Huge. It made them the 3rd largest party in parliament. For 30 years, they'd been totally marginal, below the election threshold. Suddenly, they were a major force, a dramatic and, for many, alarming shift.
But this rise had a really dark side that eventually came to light, didn't it? There was a turning point.
A very dark turning point. The brutal murder of a well-known left-wing rapper, Pavlos Fysis. He was killed by a Golden Dawn activist.
And that murder triggered something bigger.
It blew the lid off. It led directly to the arrest of Michalogliakos himself and 19 of his party's MPs. And the investigation uncovered evidence from over 30 previous, often stalled, inquiries.
Pointing to what?
Pointing to the fact that Golden Dawn wasn't just a political party with extreme views. It was operating as a criminal organization disguised as a political party.
Criminal organization. What kind of charges eventually emerged?
The scale was shocking. Over 900 documented cases of brutal assault, mainly targeting immigrants and left-wing activists. 5 murders linked to the group. Charges included running a criminal organization, extortion, illegal weapons possession, inciting racial and political violence.
It sounds more like an organized crime syndicate than a political party.
That's exactly how the courts ultimately saw it.
Wow.
69 people were charged in total, including 18 sitting MPs. Fysis's murderer got life in prison. Michalogliakos, the leader, was sentenced to 13 years.
This must have been a landmark case, not just for Greece.
Absolutely unprecedented for the EU. It was the first time in the history of the European Union that a democratic member state had legally outlawed a political party, formally recognizing it as a criminal enterprise. A huge legal and political moment.
So, after the chaos, the austerity, the rise and fall of the far right, the Greek people were, understandably, completely disillusioned. Where did they turn next?
They swung back to the left. They elected Alexis Tsipras and his Syriza party.
Syriza. And their promise was different.
Completely different. Their whole platform was about ending austerity, standing up to the Troika, defying the bailout conditions, a message of resistance.
So how did Tsipras actually handle the negotiations with the Troika? Did he follow through on that defiant stance?
Initially, yes. He and his finance minister, Yanis Varoufakis, took a really sharp, confrontational tone. They flat out refused the Troika's terms.
Move.
Very bold. Tsipras even played the ultimate card, threatening that Greece might leave the Eurozone altogether, the so-called Grexit. This was huge because there was actually no legal mechanism in the EU treaties for a country to leave the euro. It would have been completely uncharted, potentially chaotic territory. He hoped the threat would force concessions.
And in the middle of this high-stakes standoff, Tsipras did something quite radical.
Yeah.
He called a referendum.
Yes, he put the Troika's latest bailout offer directly to the Greek people. The question was simple. Do you accept these new conditions, yes or no?
What did the people say?
They said no, overwhelmingly. More than 61% of voters rejected the Troika's terms. It was a massive popular mandate against austerity, a huge oxy no vote.
So the Greek people had spoken. How did Europe, specifically the ECB, react to this rejection?
The reaction was swift and brutal. The European Central Bank immediately cut off emergency funding to Greek banks. Liquidity dried up instantly.
And the Greek government's response?
They had little choice. To prevent a total collapse of the banking system, the government shut down all the banks for over 3 weeks.
3 weeks with no banks. How did people cope?
It was chaos. Strict limits were imposed. You could only withdraw 60 euros per day from ATMs. You saw these heartbreaking images of long queues, especially elderly people, pensioners, waiting for hours, confused, desperate, unable to access their own money. The state basically seemed to start functioning for ordinary citizens.
So the people voted no. The banks were shut. The pressure was immense. What did Tsipras do? Did he hold the line backed by the referendum result?
This is perhaps the most controversial moment. Despite that massive no vote, Tsipras essentially blinked. He raised the white flag, as the source puts it.
He gave in after the referendum.
Yes. His finance minister, Varoufakis, resigned immediately in protest. Just days after the Greek people had emphatically rejected the Troika's deal, the Syriza government, led by Tsipras, accepted another bailout package, $86 billion this time.
And the conditions, were they better?
That's the kicker. The conditions attached to this new bailout were reportedly even worse, even harsher than the ones the Greek people had just voted against.
Wow, so the referendum result was essentially ignored.
It appeared that way to many. It was a stunning reversal, a bitter capitulation that left many Greeks feeling completely betrayed by the leader they thought would fight for them.
Fast forward a bit. By 2018, all these bailout programs had officially ended. Greece had received almost $300 billion in loans over those painful years. Was the country finally starting to recover?
There were signs of life, yes. A slow recovery did begin. GDP started growing again. Unemployment began to fall, albeit slowly. It felt like maybe, just maybe, the worst was over.
But then, just 2 years later, 2020 hits.
Yeah, COVID-19, another global crisis, another economic catastrophe for Greece.
What was the specific impact of the pandemic and the lockdowns on Greece?
It hit Greece particularly hard because of its reliance on tourism. Tourism makes up something like 20% of Greece's GDP and provides about a quarter of all jobs.
And lockdowns meant no tourists.
Exactly. The sector was completely paralyzed, so unemployment shot up again. Public debt soared to a new record high, 209% of GDP, just when they thought they were getting back on their feet.
Another crisis.
Yeah.
But was the international response different this time compared to the austerity era?
It was, actually. The EU launched its massive post-COVID recovery fund, and Greece became one of the biggest beneficiaries per capita.
How much aid did they get?
Over $30 billion. And crucially, about 70% of it was grants, not loans that had to be repaid. And the money could be used for investment, for stimulating the economy, not just for paying off old debts like before.
So a different approach from the EU this time, less punitive.
It definitely represented a significant shift away from the pure austerity model of the previous decade, more focus on recovery and investment.
So here we are today, after 16 years of crisis, bailouts, austerity, political turmoil, immense human suffering. What's the final tally? What's the lasting legacy for Greece?
Well, despite all the aid, despite the recent recovery efforts, the reality is Greece's public debt is still incredibly high, over 150% of GDP. And many of its key assets, its economic sovereignty in some ways, are still effectively controlled or heavily influenced by external creditors, particularly French and German banks, as the source notes. The journey's been incredibly long and painful, and the scars definitely remain.
So wrapping this up, what does this whole saga mean? What are the big takeaways? It's clear this wasn't just a simple financial crisis. It was this incredibly complex mix of human drama, high-stakes politics, and a really stark lesson in how interconnected our global economy is.
Absolutely. We've seen the long shadow cast by decades of unsustainable spending. We've seen how the promise of cheap money, like joining the Eurozone, can turn into a dangerous trap.
And the devastating human cost when austerity is imposed without considering the social impact. Plus, those shocking revelations about financial deception at the highest levels involving global institutions.
Yeah, this whole deep dive really forces you to wrestle with some fundamental questions, doesn't it? Like, where would Greece even be today if its governments over decades hadn't pursued those policies of just spending money they didn't have, maybe just for short-term political gain?
That's a huge what if. And what lessons are there for other countries? Countries may be facing their own economic headwinds today. What can they learn from Greece about managing debt, about the importance of financial independence, and maybe about that fundamental social contract between a government and its citizens?
Right. And maybe the biggest question of all, How do we as a global community find the right balance? The balance between needing international financial stability, preventing collapses like Greece almost experienced, and respecting the sovereignty, the independence, and just the basic well-being of individual nations and their people.
It's such a delicate balance.
Yeah.
This deep dive has really illuminated the past. But you're right. The implications, the questions raised by Greece's experience, they echo really powerfully today, and they'll certainly continue to shape discussions about finance, politics, and society for the future.